The salt-laced wind was a thief, stealing the warmth from Liam's skin as he stood on the polished teak deck of the Serenity. It was his third day as a junior deckhand, and the sheer oppressive luxury of the super yacht still felt like a foreign language he couldn't speak. Everything gleamed with an impossible shine, from the chrome cleats to the vast tinted windows that looked out onto the endless, indifferent blue of the Mediterranean. He felt like a ghost haunting someone else's opulent dream, a place he was paid to maintain but could never truly inhabit. His hands, though calloused from years of harder, less glamorous work, felt clumsy as he coiled a thick mooring line. The motion was familiar, one of the few things that grounded him here, but his mind was miles away, in a small, third-floor apartment that smelled of crayons and toast. He reached into the pocket of his crisp new uniform, and his fingers brushed against the worn edges of a folded photograph. It was his anchor. In the picture, his 5-year-old son Leo was missing a front tooth and grinning as if he'd just been told the world's best secret. Liam's chest tightened with a familiar ache, a mix of profound love and gnawing guilt. Taking this job meant leaving Leo with their neighbor, Mr. Henderson, for weeks at a time. It was a necessary sacrifice, a desperate bid to climb out of the financial hole his ex had dug for them. But every sunrise felt like a betrayal. A sharp, authoritative voice cut through the air, and Liam straightened instantly, his hand dropping from his pocket. "Donovan, secure that line. We have guests arriving." Captain Alistair Thorne stood near the gangway, a man carved from granite and discipline. He was tall, with silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, and his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of absolute confidence, his presence a low hum of power that every crew member felt. In his perfectly pressed white uniform, he looked less like a ship's captain and more like an admiral surveying his fleet. He was intimidating, a figure of remote authority who had spoken only a handful of necessary words to Liam since he'd come aboard. Liam's first impression of the captain had been one of sheer, unbreachable control. Alistair's world was one of schedules, checklists, and precision. He ran the Serenity not as a pleasure craft, but as a finely tuned machine, and his crew were its essential, interchangeable parts. There was a distance to him, a professional isolation that seemed to be a core part of his being. Yet sometimes, in unguarded moments, Liam had seen a flicker of something else in his eyes, a deep, settled weariness, as if the weight of all that control was a heavy burden to carry alone. Liam nodded, his voice catching in his throat. "Yes, Captain." He finished coiling the rope, his movements precise under that watchful gaze. He could feel the captain's eyes on him, not with judgment, but with an unnerving level of observation. It made him feel exposed, as if the man could see straight through the starched uniform to the frayed edges of his life. The guests were for a high-profile corporate charter, a week-long cruise for a tech company celebrating a merger. The low thrum of the engines shifted as the yacht held its position, waiting. Liam busied himself, polishing a brass bell that already shone, wiping down a rail that was already spotless, doing anything to look occupied and invisible. He was just a deckhand, a part of the machinery. That was all he wanted to be. Then the first of the black cars arrived on the quay, and the carefully constructed peace of his morning shattered. A parade of expensive suits and glittering dresses began to ascend the gangway, greeted by the chief stewardess with practiced smiles. Liam kept his head down, focusing on the scuff mark his boot had just made. A voice slick with false charm and laced with a cruelty he knew better than his own heartbeat slithered into his ear. "Well, well, look what washed up on shore." Liam froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. He didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The scent of the man's cologne, an expensive and cloying fragrance he'd once associated with safety and now only with fear, was enough. Marcus. Slowly, he turned. His ex-partner stood there, looking smug and immaculate in a tailored linen suit. His smile was a predator's, all teeth and no warmth. It was the same smile he'd used to charm Liam's friends, his family, and then later, the same smile he'd worn while dismantling Liam's life piece by piece. "Marcus," Liam said, his voice barely a whisper, "what are you doing here?" "Networking, darling. It's what successful people do," Marcus said, his eyes raking over Liam's uniform with disdain. "And you, polishing the brass. How wonderfully domestic. It suits you." The words were designed to wound, to remind Liam of his place. Liam's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He wanted to run, to disappear into the bowels of the ship, but he was trapped on the open deck. "You need to leave me alone." Marcus stepped closer, invading his personal space, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss that made Liam's skin crawl. "You still owe me, Liam. A lot." "Did you think taking a job on a floating hotel would make that disappear? I can make your life very difficult. One word from me to the right people, and this little gig of yours is over. You'll be lucky to get a job swabbing floors." He gestured vaguely toward the other guests. "My new associates are very influential." Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at Liam's throat. This job was his lifeline. It was for Leo. The thought of his son gave him a sliver of courage. "I'm paying you back. Every month. You have no right." "I have every right," Marcus snapped, his mask of civility slipping to reveal the ugliness beneath. He reached out and grabbed Liam's arm, his fingers digging in like talons. "You belong to me until I say otherwise." It was happening again. The same feeling of being small, powerless, and utterly trapped. His vision started to tunnel. The cheerful chatter of the other guests faded into a dull roar. Then a shadow fell over them. "Is there a problem here?" The voice was quiet, yet it carried the force of a command. Captain Thorne stood beside them, his posture relaxed, but his presence immense. His stormy eyes were fixed on Marcus's hand, still clamped around Liam's arm. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. Marcus, startled, immediately let go, his bravado faltering in the face of true authority. He plastered on his charming smile. "No problem at all, Captain, just catching up with an old acquaintance." Alistair's gaze shifted from Marcus to Liam, and for a fleeting second Liam saw something protective in their depths. It was a look that steadied him, that pulled him back from the edge of his panic. The captain's eyes held his for a moment longer than necessary, a silent question passing between them. Then Alistair did something that completely unmoored him. He moved to stand slightly in front of Liam, creating a subtle but unmistakable barrier. He casually placed a hand on the small of Liam's back, a touch so light it was barely there, yet it sent a jolt of warmth through the thin fabric of his shirt. It was a gesture of ownership, of alliance. "I believe you're mistaken," Alistair said, his voice smooth as polished steel. He looked directly at Marcus, his expression unreadable. "My partner and I were just enjoying the quiet before the party started." The words hung in the air, charged and unbelievable. "My partner." Liam's breath hitched. His mind reeled, trying to process the lie, the sheer audacity of it. He looked up at Alistair, whose face remained a mask of calm authority, his eyes never leaving Marcus. Marcus blinked, his smug expression finally cracking. He looked from the captain's impassive face to Liam's stunned one, then back again. The power dynamic had shifted so completely, so suddenly, that he was left floundering. The idea of a lowly deckhand being involved with the formidable Captain Thorne was ludicrous, yet the captain's delivery was so certain, his protective stance so convincing that a seed of doubt was planted. "Your partner?" Marcus stammered, his voice losing its edge. "Yes," Alistair said, the single word a final, non-negotiable statement. He didn't elaborate, he didn't need to. The gentle but firm pressure of his hand on Liam's back was all the explanation required. It was a silent, powerful claim. He then turned his head slightly, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly as it met Liam's. "Are you all right, darling?" The unexpected endearment, spoken in that low, resonant voice, sent a fresh wave of shock through Liam. He could only manage a numb, jerky nod. He was an actor in a play he hadn't known was being staged, and the captain was directing it with masterful precision. Marcus stared for another moment, his mind clearly racing to recalibrate. To challenge the captain of a vessel like this was unthinkable, especially in front of his new business partners. Defeated, he gave a tight, forced smile. "My mistake. Enjoy your evening." He turned and melted back into the crowd of guests, casting one last venomous look over his shoulder. The moment he was gone, the tension on the deck seemed to dissipate, but the ghost of Alistair's hand remained on Liam's back. The warmth lingered, a small circle of impossible safety. Alistair didn't move. He waited until Marcus was completely lost in the throng before he spoke again, his voice returning to its normal, quiet timbre, all pretense gone. "Come with me," he said softly. It wasn't a request. He guided Liam away from the main deck, his hand never leaving its post, steering him through a door marked "Crew Only" and into the quiet, climate-controlled corridor beyond. The sudden silence was deafening after the noise of the party. Liam's heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and confusion. They walked in silence to the captain's private quarters. The door clicked open and Alistair led him inside. The cabin was larger than Liam's entire apartment, a space of understated masculine elegance, dark wood, supple leather, and shelves filled with books on navigation and history. A large chart table dominated one wall, covered in maps and instruments. It was a space of order and solitude. Alistair finally removed his hand, and Liam felt its absence like a physical loss. The captain moved to a small cabinet and poured a glass of water, his back to Liam. "Drink this," he said, turning and holding it out. His expression was once again unreadable, his professional mask back in place, but his movements were gentle. Liam took the glass, his fingers trembling slightly. He drank, the cool water a small comfort to his raw throat. He didn't know what to say. "Thank you" felt inadequate. "Why did you do that?" Felt dangerous. "That man," Alistair began, his voice low as he leaned against the edge of the chart table, crossing his arms. "He has a hold over you." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Liam stared down into his glass. Shame washed over him, hot and bitter. He felt exposed, his messy, complicated life laid bare before this man of immaculate control. "He's my ex," he mumbled. "It's complicated." "It seemed quite simple from where I was standing," Alistair countered, his tone devoid of judgment. "It looked like intimidation, harassment." He paused, his gaze intense. "Is he the reason you look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders every single day?" The unexpected perception in that question startled Liam. He had tried so hard to be invisible, to just do his job and fade into the background. He hadn't realized anyone was watching him closely enough to see the strain he was under. He hadn't realized the captain was. He couldn't bring himself to answer, so he just nodded, his eyes fixed on a worn spot on the polished floor. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the gentle hum of the yacht's systems. Liam expected a lecture, a warning about bringing personal drama onto the ship. He expected to be fired. Instead, Alistair said, "He won't bother you again, not while you're on my vessel." The protective certainty was back in his voice, a solid wall between Liam and the world. "You have my word." Liam finally looked up, meeting the captain's gaze. "Why?" he whispered. "Why did you say that? About us being partners?" Alistair held his gaze, his expression unwavering. "It was the most efficient way to neutralize a threat," he said, the explanation logical, clinical. "Marcus appears to be a man who understands and respects only one thing: power. I presented him with a situation where he had none." He paused, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. It was a strategic falsehood, nothing more. A strategic falsehood. The words should have been a relief, a simple explanation that put everything back in its proper box, but for some reason, they left a strange, hollow feeling in Liam's chest, the feeling of that hand on his back, The sound of the word darling in that deep voice. It hadn't felt strategic. It had felt real. "Thank you, Captain," Liam said, his voice quiet but steady. Gratitude was the safest emotion, the only one he felt he had a right to express. "Alistair," the captain corrected him softly. "My name is Alistair." And in the quiet solitude of the captain's cabin, surrounded by the tools of navigation and the scent of old books and the sea, Liam felt a profound and terrifying shift. For the first time in years, someone had stood between him and the storm. He wasn't alone. And that feeling, more than anything else, scared him to death. The rest of the charter passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Liam threw himself into his work, polishing, scrubbing, and coiling ropes with a feverish intensity. He avoided the guest areas as much as possible, terrified of another encounter with Marcus. He saw him a few times from a distance, always surrounded by other people, laughing and networking. Marcus never looked his way again. It was as if he were invisible, shielded by the captain's lie. Alistair, for his part, retreated back behind his professional facade. He was Captain Thorne again, issuing orders with crisp efficiency. But something had changed. Liam now felt the weight of his gaze differently. It was no longer just the observation of a superior. It felt watchful, protective. Their paths would cross on the deck, and the captain would give him a brief, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent acknowledgement, a continuation of the promise made in his cabin. The day the charter ended and the last of the guests disembarked, Liam felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. He was free. He could go home to Leo. As he was packing his small duffel bag, a knock came at his cabin door. It was Mia, the chief stewardess, a woman with kind eyes and an intuition that bordered on psychic. "Captain wants to see you on the bridge," she said, leaning against the door frame. Her gaze was knowing. "He's been asking about you." "He has?" Liam asked, his stomach twisting into a knot. Mia just smiled. "Go on, don't keep the man waiting." Liam made his way to the bridge, his footsteps echoing in the quiet ship. Alistair was standing at the main console, looking out at the now empty marina. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and violet, casting long shadows across the water. "You wanted to see me, Captain?" Liam asked, his voice small in the large, silent space. Alistair turned. In the soft, fading light, the harsh lines of his face seemed to soften. "We have a 2-week layover before the next charter. Maintenance and resupply. Most of the crew are taking their shore leave." He paused. "I want you to stay on." Liam blinked. "Stay on, sir? My son—" "I'm aware," Alistair interrupted gently. I was hoping you might bring him here." The offer was so unexpected it left Liam speechless. "Bring Leo onto the yacht?" "It's the safest place for him," Alistair said, his voice low and serious. "And for you. I don't trust that Marcus won't try something now that you're off the vessel. Here, I can guarantee your safety." He looked away toward the glittering lights of the shore. "There are guest suites. He would be comfortable. You would be paid for your time, of course." It was a preposterous offer. It was an act of extraordinary kindness. Liam's mind raced. His apartment building had notoriously lax security. Marcus knew where he lived, where Leo went to preschool. The fear that had been simmering just below the surface for a week came rushing back. I can't ask you to do that," Liam stammered. "You're not asking," Alistair stated simply, turning back to face him fully. His stormy eyes were sincere. "I'm offering." "Let me do this, Liam." The use of his first name again felt intimate, significant. He was offering a sanctuary, a gilded cage to protect them from the wolves on shore. It was too much. But the thought of Leo, of his bright, innocent smile, made the decision for him. How could he say no to safety? "Okay," he breathed. "Okay, thank you, Alistair." The next day, Liam returned with a small boy attached to his leg, his eyes wide with wonder. Leo had never seen anything like the Serenity. To him, it wasn't a symbol of wealth or power. It was the world's greatest pirate ship. "Is this your boat, Daddy?" Leo asked, his voice echoing in the grand salon. "No, sweetie, I just work here," Liam said, trying to keep Leo from touching a priceless-looking vase. Alistair appeared at the top of the sweeping central staircase. He had changed out of his uniform into a simple pair of gray trousers and a dark blue cashmere sweater. He looked softer, more approachable, but no less imposing. Leo, however, was entirely undeterred. He let go of Liam's leg and pointed a small finger up at the captain. "Are you the Pirate King?" A genuine, startling smile broke across Alistair's face, transforming his features. It was the first time Liam had ever seen him truly smile, and it made his breath catch in his chest. The weariness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a warm amusement. "Something like that," Alistair replied, descending the stairs. He knelt down so he was on Leo's level, a gesture of respect that touched Liam deeply. "My name is Alistair, and you must be Leo." "I'm 5, Leo announced proudly, holding up 5 fingers. "Can I see the steering wheel? Daddy said it's bigger than a pizza." Alistair chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. "It is. And yes, you can, but only if you agree to be my first mate for the day." Leo's eyes went wide. "A real first mate?" "The realest," Alistair confirmed with a solemn nod. And just like that, the formidable Captain Thorne was completely and utterly conquered by a 5-year-old boy. Liam watched, a strange mix of awe and trepidation churning inside him as Alistair led his son by the hand toward the bridge. Leo chattered away, asking a million questions, and Alistair answered every single one with patient gravity. Liam saw a side of Alistair he never could have imagined. He saw a man who listened with genuine interest as Leo explained the intricate social hierarchy of his dinosaur toys. He saw him carefully lift Leo up to see through the ship's binoculars, his large, capable hands gentle on the boy's small frame. He saw him laugh, a real, unreserved laugh, when Leo declared that a passing seagull was definitely a pterodactyl. Later that afternoon, Liam found them in the main salon. Leo was sitting at the low coffee table, a large sheet of paper and a box of crayons spread out before him. Alistair sat on the floor opposite him, his long legs folded awkwardly, watching the boy draw with rapt attention. "I'm drawing our family," Leo announced to Liam. He held up his masterpiece. There were 3 stick figures. One, labeled Daddy, was holding hands with a much smaller one labeled Me. On the other side of Leo was a very tall stick figure with scribbled gray hair at the sides. Leo pointed to it. "And that's Captain Alistair. He's the king." Liam's heart did a painful, complicated flip. He looked at Alistair, whose gaze met his over Leo's head. The captain's expression was soft, vulnerable in a way Liam had never seen. The innocent, unconditional acceptance from a child had seemingly bypassed all of his carefully constructed defenses. Leo saw him not as a powerful captain or a wealthy yacht owner, but simply as a kind man. A king. That night, after he'd tucked a very tired first mate into the impossibly soft bed of the guest suite, Liam found Alistair on the aft deck, staring out at the dark water. "He adores you," Liam said softly, coming to stand beside him at the railing. "The feeling is mutual," Alistair replied, his voice a low rumble. "He's a wonderful boy, Liam. You've done a good job." The simple praise felt like a balm on his frayed soul. "Thank you for this, for everything." "He makes it easy," Alistair said, a hint of wistfulness in his tone. "There's an honesty to him. The world hasn't taught him to build walls yet." The implication was clear. They stood in a comfortable silence for a long time. The only sounds the gentle lapping of waves against the hull and the distant city lights painting a soft glow on the horizon. The yacht, once a place of employment and anxiety, was starting to feel like something else entirely. It felt like a haven. It was beginning to feel like home. The 2 weeks of their sanctuary passed in a surreal, domestic haze. Days were filled with the sound of Leo's laughter echoing through the grand spaces of the yacht. Alistair seemed to shed his captain's persona entirely, becoming simply Alistair to Leo, a patient playmate and an attentive listener. He and Liam fell into an easy rhythm, sharing meals, watching movies with Leo nestled between them on the plush sofa, and talking late into the night after the boy was asleep. Liam learned about Alistair's solitary childhood, his love for antique maps, his quiet dissatisfaction with a life spent catering to the whims of the ultra-rich. Alistair, in turn, learned about Liam's passion for marine biology, a dream he'd deferred to raise Leo, and the slow, suffocating erosion of his confidence during his years with Marcus. They spoke of everything and nothing, the quiet confessions building a fragile bridge between their two very different worlds. But the real world, with all its ugliness, could not be kept at bay forever. The first intrusion came as an email. It was from the charter company, a coldly formal message informing Liam that a serious complaint had been lodged against him by a recent guest, Mr. Marcus Vance. The allegations were vague but venomous, hinting at unprofessional conduct and questioning his moral character. His employment was under review. Liam felt the blood drain from his face. He was sitting in the galley, a half-empty cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. He read the email 3 times, the words blurring together. Marcus was making good on his threat. Alistair found him there minutes later, his face a mask of stone. "I received a copy of that email," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "As captain of the vessel, I was CCD. "He's trying to get me fired," Liam whispered, the screen of his phone glowing with the hateful words. "He's going to ruin this. It's the only good thing." "He will do nothing," Alistair cut in, his tone absolute. He came around the table and took the phone from Liam's numb fingers, his own hand closing over Liam's for a brief, reassuring moment. "I will handle this. I will draft a response that will make it abundantly clear that his complaint is baseless and malicious." But the corporate complaint was only the beginning. A few days later, a friend from shore sent Liam a screenshot from a local gossip blog. There was a picture of him, a candid shot taken weeks ago looking tired and stressed. The headline read, "Troubled Deckhand's shady past. Is super yacht Serenity harboring a deadbeat dad?" The article was a smear piece, filled with half-truths and outright lies spun by an anonymous source who was clearly Marcus. It painted Liam as unstable, a financial wreck, and an unfit parent. That was the line. The mention of his parenting, the threat to his status as Leo's father, struck a primal fear in Liam's heart. He felt sick. This was no longer about a job. This was about his son. The threats became more direct. An anonymous email arrived, its message chillingly simple. "I know where your son goes to school. It would be a shame if child services had to pay a visit." That was the breaking point. The sanctuary of the yacht suddenly felt like a very small island in a very large, hostile sea. Marcus wasn't just trying to get him fired, he was trying to destroy him, to take the one thing that mattered. That night, the fear was a living thing inside him, a cold, coiling serpent in his gut. He couldn't sleep. Every creak of the yacht, every splash of water against the hull sounded like a threat. He lay in the opulent guest suite, staring at the ceiling, his mind a maelstrom of worst-case scenarios. He imagined social workers at his door, Leo being taken from him, Marcus's triumphant, cruel smile. He couldn't stay there alone. He couldn't bear the solitude. Barefoot, wearing only a pair of sweatpants and a thin t-shirt, he padded through the silent, sleeping yacht. The corridors were dimly lit, the ship's luxury muted in the darkness. He found himself standing outside the captain's cabin, his heart pounding. What was he doing? This was insane. This was crossing a line that had never been spoken but was clearly understood. He raised a trembling hand and knocked softly on the heavy wooden door. A moment later it opened. Alistair stood there, silhouetted by the soft lamplight from within. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and dark pajama pants, his hair slightly disheveled from sleep. He looked instantly awake, his stormy eyes sharp with concern as they took in Liam's state. "Liam, what is it? Is it Leo?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. "No, Leo's fine. He's asleep," Liam whispered, his own voice shaking. I can't sleep. I can't be alone right now." The confession felt like ripping something out of his chest, a raw admission of weakness. He felt pathetic, a child scared of the dark. He looked down at his bare feet on the plush carpet, unable to meet the captain's gaze. "I'm sorry. This is stupid. I'll go back." He started to turn, but Alistair's hand shot out, his fingers gently closing around Liam's wrist. The touch was electric, stopping him in his tracks. "No, don't go." Alistair's grip was warm and firm, a solid anchor in his swirling panic. He gently pulled Liam into the cabin and closed the door behind them, shutting out the rest of the world. The room was just as Liam remembered it, a haven of quiet order. A single lamp cast a warm glow over the space. Alistair led him toward the seating area, a pair of comfortable leather armchairs and a low sofa. I keep seeing his face," Liam admitted, his voice cracking. "I keep hearing his threats. What if he tries to take Leo? A court would look at my finances, at that article. They would also look at his history," Alistair said, his voice a low, soothing rumble, "which my lawyers are currently compiling into a rather extensive file. He has a documented pattern of harassment against 2 of his former partners. He won't get anywhere near Leo." The news that Alistair had already set lawyers on the problem was both a shock and an immense relief. This man was always 3 steps ahead, always building fortifications Liam didn't even know he needed. But the rational assurance couldn't quiet the emotional terror. The fear was deep, ingrained from years of Marcus's psychological warfare. Liam sank onto the edge of the sofa, burying his face in his hands. A dry, ragged sob escaped him. He felt the sofa dip beside him. Alistair sat down, not too close, but near enough that Liam could feel the warmth radiating from him. He didn't say anything. He just sat there, his presence a solid, silent testament of support. After a long moment, Liam finally managed to get his breathing under control. He lifted his head, feeling drained and embarrassed. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. "Stop apologizing for being human," Alistair said softly. His stormy eyes were filled with a deep, unexpected well of empathy. "Fear is a rational response to a threat, Liam. There is no shame in it." Liam looked at this powerful, self-contained man, a man who seemed to fear nothing, and felt a chasm between them. "You don't understand what it feels like to have everything you love be so fragile." Alistair's expression shifted. A shadow passed through his eyes, a flicker of old, deep-seated pain. "You think I don't understand?" he asked, his voice barely audible. He looked away toward the dark windows that reflected the soft light of the cabin. "Years ago, I had a younger brother, Michael. He was bright, reckless, full of life. He got involved with the wrong people. I was busy building my career, commanding my first vessel. I saw the signs, the bruises he tried to hide, the money that kept disappearing. I told myself it was just a phase, that he'd sort it out." He paused, and the silence in the room was heavy with the weight of his unspoken grief. "I was a captain. I was in control of a multi-million-dollar ship and a crew of 30, but I couldn't control the one thing that mattered. I didn't protect him. I was in another hemisphere when I lost him." The confession hung in the air, raw and devastating. Alistair Thorne, the man of absolute control, was admitting to the most profound loss of it. He was confessing a failure that had clearly haunted him for years. "I learned a lesson that day," Alistair continued, his voice thick with emotion as he turned his gaze back to Liam. "Power, money, authority, they are worthless if you don't use them to protect the people you care about." His eyes were shining with unshed tears. "So yes, Liam, I do understand what it feels like to be afraid of losing someone, and I will not fail again. I will not let him harm you or your son." The raw vulnerability in his voice, the glimpse into the heart of this solitary man, shattered the last of Liam's defenses. This wasn't about strategy anymore. This wasn't about a captain protecting a crew member. This was personal. This was about atonement. This was about care. "Alistair," Liam breathed, his own name for the man feeling different on his tongue, heavier with meaning. He saw it then, in the captain's eyes. The same desperate need for connection that he felt himself. He saw the loneliness that Alistair had papered over with discipline and routine, the performance on the deck with Marcus, the lie about being partners. It hadn't been just a lie for Alistair either. It had been the expression of a deep, unfulfilled longing to be that for someone, a protector, a partner. Without thinking, driven by a force stronger than fear, Liam reached out and covered Alistair's hand with his own. Alistair's fingers turned, lacing through his, their palms pressing together. The contact was a current, a silent and complete understanding passing between them. Alistair's gaze dropped to their joined hands, then slowly lifted back to Liam's face. He leaned in, his movement hesitant, questioning. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was anticipation. He closed his eyes, giving his silent consent. The first touch of Alistair's lips was soft, tentative, a question asked in the quiet of the night. Liam responded by leaning into it, a quiet answer of his own. The kiss deepened, no longer hesitant, but filled with all the unspoken words, the shared fears, and the burgeoning hope that had grown between them in the sanctuary of the ship. It was a kiss of profound certainty, a promise of safety, a claiming. It tasted of salt and sorrow and the incredible, terrifying relief of finally being found. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. Alistair rested his forehead against Liam's, their joined hands a warm, solid anchor between them. "Stay," Alistair whispered, his voice a raw plea. "Don't go back to your cabin. Stay here with me." Liam looked into those stormy eyes, no longer seeing a captain, but a man who had offered him his own broken heart as a shield. "Okay," he whispered back, "I'll stay." He would not sleep in the guest suite. He would sleep here, in the captain's cabin, in the very heart of his sanctuary, and for the first time in a very long time, he knew the sea would feel different in the morning. In the calm, gray light of dawn, Liam woke slowly. For a moment he was disoriented, the scent of bergamot and old paper unfamiliar. Then it all came flooding back. The fear, the late-night confession, the kiss that had changed everything. He was in Alistair's cabin, tangled in the soft sheets of the captain's large bed. Alistair was beside him, still asleep, his arm draped protectively over Liam's waist. In sleep, Alistair's face was stripped of its usual authority. He looked younger, the lines of stress around his eyes smoothed away. Liam watched the gentle rise and fall of his chest, the sheer, solid presence of him a comfort so profound it almost hurt. He had spent years sleeping with one ear open, always on alert, but last night, curled against Alistair's side, he had slept a deep, dreamless sleep. The sea outside the porthole was calm, its rhythm a gentle shushing, and for the first time it felt like a lullaby instead of a threat. The threat, however, had not vanished. It had merely been held at bay for a few hours. Later that morning, Alistair's personal phone rang. Liam, who was in the small galley section of the cabin making coffee, watched as Alistair's expression hardened as he listened. "I see," Alistair said, his voice cold as ice. "Send me the file and schedule a call with my legal team for 1000 hours. I want this handled, swiftly." He hung up, his jaw tight. He looked at Liam, his eyes dark with a controlled fury. "That was my lawyer. Marcus filed a petition for an emergency custody hearing. He's claiming you're an unfit parent, using the article as evidence and citing your transient lifestyle." The coffee mug slipped from Liam's fingers, shattering on the galley floor. The sound was violent in the quiet cabin. "No," he breathed, the single word a denial of a reality too horrible to contemplate. "He can't. He has no standing. He's not." "He's claiming a paternal interest," Alistair finished, his voice grim. "He's lying, of course. It's a scare tactic, a way to drag you through a humiliating and expensive legal battle, but we are not going to let it get that far." Alistair moved with a sudden, decisive energy. He was no longer the gentleman who had held Liam through the night. He was Captain Thorne, a commander facing an enemy incursion. "This ends. Today." He spent the next hour on the phone, his voice a low, authoritative murmur as he spoke to lawyers, investigators, and contacts Liam couldn't even imagine having. He was dismantling Marcus's attack with methodical, ruthless precision. He marshaled his resources like a general deploying troops, his power a tangible force even over the phone lines. While Alistair fought the war, Liam's only thought was of his son. He went to the guest suite where Leo was happily building a tower of pillows, oblivious to the storm raging around his small world. Liam gathered him into his arms, holding him tight, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair. This was his world. This was all that mattered. He would not let Marcus touch it. An hour later, Alistair found them in the main salon. "It's done," he said. The fury was gone, replaced by a calm certainty. "Done?" Liam asked, looking up from the floor where he and Leo were coloring. "My investigators uncovered Marcus's rather precarious financial situation. It seems our guest is on the verge of bankruptcy. This whole thing, the charter, the new associates, was a desperate performance to attract investors. My legal team made a quiet inquiry with the board of his potential new company, sharing the file on his history of harassment and the fraudulent nature of his legal claims against you." Alistair's lips thinned into a grim line. His funding has been pulled, his business deal is dead, and the custody petition has been withdrawn with a formal apology for the misunderstanding. Liam stared at him, stunned into silence. It was over. Just like that. The monster that had haunted him for years, the threat that had loomed over his life, had been neutralized by a few phone calls. Alistair had used his power not as a blunt instrument, but as a surgeon's scalpel, cutting away the cancer with clean, precise strokes. "He has also been informed," Alistair added, his voice dropping lower, "that if he ever contacts you or Leo again in any capacity, I will personally see to it that he is buried in so much litigation he will never see the light of day again." I believe the message was received. Relief, pure and overwhelming, washed over Liam. It was so potent it felt like a physical weight lifting from his shoulders. He felt light, untethered. He looked at Alistair, the man who had moved mountains for him, and his heart felt too big for his chest. With the threat gone, a new, quieter question settled in the space between them. What now? The crisis that had thrown them together was over. The forced proximity, the need for protection, it was all gone. They were free. A few days later, the yacht was gleaming, fully restocked and ready for its next charter. The crew was returning from shore leave. The fragile domestic bubble they had lived in was about to burst. Liam knew he had to leave. He and Leo couldn't stay on the yacht forever. He packed their small bag, his movements slow and heavy. Every folded shirt felt like a step away from the only safety he had known. He found Alistair on the bridge, standing in the same spot where he had first offered Liam sanctuary. He was wearing his crisp captain's uniform again, the symbol of his authority, and Liam feared of the distance that was about to reassert itself between them. "Our things are packed," Liam said quietly, his voice unsteady. "Thank you, Alistair, for everything. I don't know how I can ever repay you." Alistair turned from the windows, his expression serious. "There is nothing to repay," he said. He walked toward Liam, stopping just a few feet away. This was never a transaction. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "Liam, I have tendered my resignation with the yacht's owner." Liam's jaw dropped. "What, you resigned? But this ship is your life." "It was," Alistair corrected him gently. "It was my life before you and Leo." He closed the remaining distance between them, his gaze intense and unwavering. "I have a new contract. I'll be captaining a scientific research vessel. Shorter trips, more time on shore. It's based out of the Marine Institute downtown." He paused, letting the significance of his words sink in. "The same institute you told me you dreamed of studying at." Liam was speechless. Alistair had not just protected him, he had listened to his dreams and quietly rearranged his own entire world to make space for them. "The crisis is over," Alistair said, his voice low and earnest. "Marcus is gone. You don't need my protection anymore. You are free to go to build your life however you see fit. But I have to ask you to stay." He reached out, his hands gently cupping Liam's face. "Stay with me. Not because you are scared or because you need a safe place to hide. Stay because you want to. Build your life with me. Let me build mine with you." It was a sober daylight confession. There was no storm, no fear, no crisis. There was only a choice, a clear, conscious choice offered from one man to another. Tears welled in Liam's eyes, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "Yes," he whispered, the word a release, a promise, a beginning. "Okay, yes." Alistair's answering smile was brilliant, a sunrise after a long night. He leaned in and kissed him, a kiss that wasn't about passion or desperation, but about commitment. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. 6 months later, the air no longer smelled of diesel and polished chrome, but of damp earth and blooming jasmine. Their new home was a modest but beautiful house with a wide porch and a garden that sloped down toward a quiet, pebbled beach. The sea was still a constant presence in their lives, but now it was the backdrop to their home, not their workplace. Liam stood on the porch, a textbook on coastal ecosystems resting on the railing, and watched the two most important people in his life. Alistair and a now 6-year-old Leo were crouched in the garden, their heads close together as they carefully planted a row of tomato seedlings. Alistair's sleeves were rolled up, his forearms smudged with dirt, and he was laughing as Leo managed to get more soil on his nose than in the pot. The imposing Captain Thorne was gone, replaced by Alistair, a man who knew the names of all of Leo's favorite dinosaurs and who made pancakes in the shape of starfish on Sunday mornings. Liam was no longer a deckhand, but a full-time student, finally pursuing the dream he had set aside for so long. He was excelling, his mind sharp and hungry for knowledge, his heart full and at peace. Alistair looked up and caught his eye, his smile warm and content. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked up to the porch, wrapping his arms around Liam from behind and resting his chin on his shoulder. They stood there for a moment, watching their son, who was now carefully watering the new plants. "He's going to be a better botanist than I am," Alistair murmured into Liam's ear, his voice filled with affection. Liam leaned back against Alistair's solid chest, a feeling of rightness settling deep in his bones. "You know," he said softly, "that day on the yacht when you told Marcus I was your partner, it was the single most terrifying moment of my entire life." Alistair's arms tightened around him. He pressed a gentle kiss to Liam's temple. "I know," he whispered. "And for me," he added, his voice thick with an emotion that still, after all these months, made Liam's heart ache with love. "It was the very first moment of mine." Liam turned in his embrace, his hand coming up to cup Alistair's jaw. He looked into those stormy eyes which now held only the calm, clear promise of a shared horizon. He smiled, a genuine, soul-deep smile of a man who had not only found a safe harbor, but had found his true north. He leaned in and kissed him, a slow, gentle kiss that sealed their past, their present, and the beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary future that stretched out before them, as vast and as hopeful as the sea.